History of Philippine educational system and the evolution of social studies.
The Philippine educational system is a lengthy and difficult history. The first full study of the Allied medium language of instruction was completed, which also analyzed the Philippine educational system and its historical features. This was accomplished by Andrew Gonzalez. Also, Catherine Young discussed the Filipino language as a medium of instruction in the country's educational system, a geological literacy model that develops Filipino students' critical thinking skills, builds cognitive and emotive domains, and prioritizes their local language, experience, and culture.
Educational in the Philippines during pre-Spanish era are informal and unstructured. The educators or the teachers during the pre-colonial era were the Babaylan and the Catalonan, gifted with wisdom and knowledge on spirituality and the system of running their own society. They were respected by the people of the society. Therefore, the type of education that was taught was one of beliefs and traditions. Education was truly valued by the early Filipinos. Both Filipino men and women knew how to read and write using their own alphabet called alibata. Alibata used as a medium instructions. The type of education was not institutionalized, and separate institutions for education were not in place. Specialization in education also did not exist.
In Era II or during the Spanish regime, as early in the pre-Magellanic times, the educational system of the Philippines are informal and unstructured. The children were provided more vocational training and less academics. The pre-Spanish system of education that time underwent major changes during the Spanish colonization. The tribal tutors were replaced by the Spanish missionaries, and primary instruction was free and the teaching of Spanish was compulsory. Education during that period was inadequate, controlled, and suppressed.
The Philippine educational system during American period. In 1898, American occupied Manila and reopened schools wherein the American soldiers were the first teachers and English became the medium of instruction. In this era, education should be universal and free for all regardless of sex, age, religion, and socioeconomic status of the individual, as education was the means of giving people an orientation towards a democratic way of life. There are a lot of laws that have been implemented during this era, and one of these is the Act No. 74 that established the public primary school in 1901 and the intermediate school in 1904, which provide free public education. The focus of the educational system during American period is to train the Filipinos in the democratic way of life, citizenship, moral character, and to teach the fundamentals of vocational education. The influences of the American in the educational system and curriculum are the following. One of these is the use of English language as medium of instruction and providing different levels of schools in the Philippines.
Now, let us proceed to the next era, which is the Japanese occupation. So, during this period, the educational system of the Philippines were destroyed by the Japanese through inflicting force and violence. And the Japanese proposed 6 principles of education. And to sum it up, so, during the Japanese period, they forcefully promote their culture in the educational system by including their language, which is Nihongo, as the main language of instructions instead of English. And during this period, the teaching of social studies is not present because the Japanese were highly focused on promoting their culture in the educational system. However, I think that this period is the turning point of including or teaching social studies in the educational system of the Philippines.
Today's education system in the Philippines most closely resembles the American model. Philippines' educational system was divided into 3 levels. First is the kindergarten and elementary school. Central to the K-12 reforms was the provision of 1 year of kindergarten schooling for every child in the Philippines, which is done before elementary school. Elementary school in the Philippines covers grades 1 to 6. Next is the junior and senior high school. Junior high school in the Philippines covers grades 7 to 10. Senior high school in the Philippines covers grades 11 to 12. Lastly is the tertiary education. The Philippine tertiary education typically takes 4 or 5 years or up to 8 years for subjects such as law and medicine.